3, 2, 1. Welcome to the David the Dog Trainer Podcast, episode 189. And Josh and I are on the same side of the screen again because we're trying something new. We're going to try to go live on YouTube and Instagram.
Oh, and Instagram. Oh,
we're
boy.
doing both. Let's get them logged up here. See how this friggin' goes. Create longer reels. I don't want to create longer reels. Oh, this could be a disaster, guys. Fully preparing everybody for this.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, boy.
All right. I don't know if we are... I think we're officially live. All right. Jonathan on YouTube says, hello, Jonathan. Can you let me know if you hear me, Jonathan? That would be awesome if you can, because if not, we're going to have to figure out what the heck's going on here.
Yeah.
So if you could let us know that you hear us, that would be fantastic. I feel like he hears us. Wonderful. Look at this.
Hey, technology's working for us today.
What's up, guys? All right, so as I said, this is the David the Dog Trainer Podcast, episode 189. We're on 189 weeks now. That's pretty awesome. And we got a bunch of people coming on. Look at this. We got 8 people on Instagram, 9 people on Instagram. We got some people on YouTube. Wow. Everybody's saying they could hear us. I love to hear it. Welcome. This is the first time we've ever done this. I am ashamed to admit that the Miracle Canine Show podcast was the first ones to officially do it live. I don't know what it was. Damn. I think I slept a little bit on the live feature. I think we had talked about it for a while. And I don't know. There's something about going live. I've never been. It's the one, for as much as I'm on camera, I don't go live very much. I've done it probably in my entire career less than a dozen times. And it's not that I'm like nervous to do it. It's just I'm just not used to it.
I don't know. There's like a little bit of pressure.
So here we are. So everybody, this time is yours. So this show today is about all of you guys that are tuning in and joining us. And we are excited to talk to you guys. I'm down to talk about anything. So if you guys have questions about dog training, you guys got questions about business, you got questions about social media, you got questions on any of that kind of stuff, pitch it at us and we'll start getting some talking points to go over. Keith says, hello from Bishop Auckland in the northeast of England. Hey. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. One of the coolest things for me every year as we do our yearly wrap up and get our statistics on social media and stuff like that is seeing how many followers we have from all over the world. It's wild when you look at social media as this platform that could push you out there to literally anybody out there. And it's cool. You know, when I started doing the virtual calls a year or two ago with people, the virtual consults, you know, I remember the first time I did somebody with it in England, right? Or the first time with somebody, I think I did somebody in Germany. And then obviously all over the United States and stuff. Super, super cool. I did one with somebody down in, what the hell is it? I don't know. Somewhere in like South, what's it with Central America area? What's the main place down there? I'm blanking on it.
Central or South America?
I think it's Central, but it might be South.
Oh,
it's where Jake Paul lives.
Oh,
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica.
Is that Central America or South America?
But
I did one with somebody down there. That was pretty sweet. All right, we got some comments coming in. Joyful Canine. Yes, I know you are probably the first person that begged us to do a live stream way back when. And guess what? Here we are. We're on a freaking live stream. And it's just for you.
Yeah, we had one on Instagram.
And we got our first official question here. All right. Caitlin asks, how late is too late to get your dog trained age-wise? This is a really good question we get all the time from people, to which I reassure them there's not really a too late, right? There are a couple of factors you need to weigh in when you're looking at when should you get your dog trained and when should the cutoff be on it. And usually for me, what I tell people is usually around 10 years old, I recommend thinking twice before getting your dog professionally trained, meaning you're going to be spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on training because unfortunately, as we know, dogs don't live forever. And though you could train old dogs new tricks, you know, I say, how much of a financial commitment do you want to make into the dog that may only potentially live a couple more years than at that point? Obviously, it's a lot of money when you start breaking down $2,000 a year for 2 more years of, you know, a better trained dog, obviously. That's a tough pill to swallow for some people. Additionally, the older they are, the habits are a bit more ingrained, obviously. And though that doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot, get them past those habits, the stronger ingrained the habits are, the more stressful it can be on the dog, obviously, to work through some of those habits. So I look at how severe are the problems you're experiencing with your dog, and, how many of them can we at that point just kind of manage and deal with? That way we don't put a lot of unnecessary stress on the dog. And then if there are some that are like major areas we need to improve on, at that point you could then consider doing some really basic training. Maybe instead of doing a full program, it's like we learn how to manage a particular behavioral issue better. We learn how to get past a very particular behavioral issue better, but we take everything else we generally would go over with dogs in a training program and kind of push it on the wayside a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Look at this. Got a lot of people waving at us. All right. Joyful, this is your first question you're asking on the live show. Let's get into it. What does she say? I can't read that. Josh, read that to me.
Okay. Do you build specific lesson plans for each client ahead of time, or do you wing it based on experience and how each session goes, as long as the end goals are ultimately being met?
This is a super good question. And if you ask all of our trainers, we'll just talk about our trainers, for example, they'll all probably say something slightly different. Obviously, we like to know what the dog is coming in for. We like to know, what the behavioral issues and the major goals that the client is looking to achieve are. But the reason why we do such long lesson programs with people is because I don't ever want to have to pick and choose what things I need to work on when. Meaning a lot of people do these like formal consults with a dog, and they do that, I think, with the intent of one, trying to sell a program on a client. When you're with them in person, you got hands on the dog and you kind of talk through what the goals are going to be with the dog. I think clients are sometimes a little bit more likely to sign up for your program than at that point. But in the end of the day, there are a couple of things we need to be able to meet, right? We need to meet a baseline expectation of basic reliability from a command standpoint. So I like for all dogs to be trained to an off-leash standard of being able to not necessarily have them off-leash in every context, but to be able to communicate with them whether they have a leash on or not. And I think that puts us in a position where, first and foremost, we can manage most of the behavioral issues we have, right? If you're having issues with stranger danger, or you're having issues with leash reactivity, or you're having issues with chasing wildlife and stuff like that, when you have that off-leash standard, first and foremost, whether you could stop those problems or not, you can keep the dog under control around those types of things. From there, session by session, as the dog comes in, usually what I like to do is I like to do almost a mini assessment with each client as they come in, right? So every time a client comes in for their session, we do a little sit down, and we do roughly 10 minutes at the beginning of the session where we talk about how did the last week go? What, if anything, this is how I do it, what, if anything, were the major keys over this last week of either super problematic areas, right? Or things that the dog struggled with, or if you had one thing that was your biggest headache over the last week, what would it be? And usually what I'll try to do is I'll always try to incorporate that thing into my lesson that week with the client, right? So I guess you can kind of say it's winging it a little bit, because I don't proactively think all right, I got this client coming in, I did my evaluation, so over these next 10 sessions, these are what I'm going to do each session. I think anytime you get too rigid like that and tell yourself, session 1, I'm doing place. Session 2, I'm working on jumping. Session 3, I'm working on leash walking, whatever it may be. And if you try to stick to that too much, you'll lose sight of what the client really needs help with. Because sometimes as you're going through the training process, what'll wind up happening is you work with this dog for 2-3 weeks, and then it's because you put the dog in new situations they've never been put in before, or you resolve some big hurdle very quickly, all of the client's goals suddenly change, right? Because they're putting the dog in this new scenario that they've never experienced before, and they see this new behavioral issue they didn't think they had, or whatever it may be, right? So I think having a general, and this is exactly what I tell my clients, having a general curriculum of what we want the dog to meet is important. And as we're going through the sessions we have with the dog, or as we're going through the board and train with the dog, we want to meet those things. But past that, leaving each session loose enough to be able to bob and weave based on what the client needs based on their last week is the way that I generally handle that kind of stuff. So, and actually, now that I think about it, I kind of think all of our trainers probably would agree with that for the most part. I think the biggest difference is I wing it a little bit more, right? I am guilty of sometimes I'll have to jump in on a session and help out with a session Michelle's doing when she's out of town, or with past trainers we've had, or I get a follow-up client in that maybe did a board and train with a trainer 3 years ago, that the trainer's no longer with us and they want to come in for a follow-up session, and I'll do it. And I won't research that dog at all because I almost try to keep myself mentally like open to when this client comes in. I don't want anything that's going to distract me or potentially skew my judgment of what this dog needs in this moment. And I think sometimes the more you dig into the past or what the dog may have tried or not tried, that sometimes can interrupt your train of thought on those types of things. So, okay, let's move on here. Oh, Josh, you logged on.
Yeah.
Look at you.
Just
Okay, next one.
Ask their questions.
Jonathan.
Make sure you're asking your questions.
What do you think of the surprise proposal to ban electronic collars in Scotland? And if the proposal is implemented, what are the implications of this? So, Jonathan, you're going to have to clarify to me, is this the one that happened like a year ago? Is this the one where they were trying to do it in like all of the UK, or is there now a new one in Scotland? And follow-up question to that, I actually thought that Scotland may have had them banned already independently past the UK, but I could also be mistaken on that as well. Anytime you start getting into like banning tools and stuff like that, I mean, we saw this last year, if you're referring to the one where they tried to ban them in the UK and it was going to take effect as of February 1st. And we saw that obviously got thrown out the window because as soon as they proposed it, there was a community of dog trainers and dog activists that came out and pushed back on it, right? And they actually debated the science of why people are saying these tools are so bad. And they debated, the politicians that were blindly, saying, oh, we should do this or whatever it may be, obviously. Okay, so somebody clarified Wales has the ban and the rest of the UK has no ban yet. So this may be, Jonathan, then I'm assuming you're talking about something new. Hold on, I get it. There we go. But yeah, The UK, we know, can be a little bit more, I guess you could say, conservative with these types of things. Obviously, anytime you get into a bad person, good person conversation of like you use e-collars, so you're a bad person, you're an animal abuser, this and that. I think from a political standpoint, it's not a good look if you start trying to defend that. So I think luckily they tried to blindly ban them. That got thrown out the window. Who knows if it's going to happen again? I'm sure they're still in debates about it, but we proved one time already that, it's not going to work, right? Like you're going to try to push back on it, and we're going to push back just as hard, and we're not going to go down without a fight with it. What are the implications of if they were to get banned? I mean, we've talked about this a lot of times before. I think most trainers can comfortably say that if I didn't have e-collars at my disposal, I could still train my dog. Like I understand the learning theory enough where I could reward dogs, I could punish dogs, I could articulate things with markers and my commands and stuff like that in a way where I'm not contingent on the use of the e-collar. But personally, I've said this before, I do a lot of off-leash hiking with my dogs. I got a golf course right behind my house that during the winter, particularly around now, we'll go run off and have fun and things like that. And though my dogs don't really chase animals anymore, they're very reliable with their recall. I don't need to correct them very often. I would not feel 100% confident doing some of the things that I do with them currently if I didn't have an e-collar. It's just one of those things where people could argue. It's like, well, do you feel like you're not a good driver and that's why you use your seatbelt when you get in the car? Or do you feel like you're not a good trainer and that's why you feel like you need to have your e-collar on every time you take your dog out? Like that must mean they're not trained this, that. It's like emergencies happen, guys. Like shit happens, and sometimes shit happens in ways that you could never predict, no matter how good of a trainer you are. And if you want to risk that just because you want to stand on your soapbox of I don't use e-collars and I don't need them and this and that, like by all means, I'm happy for you, go for it. But it's just not something I feel comfortable with. So I think my dogs I would find other ways to enrich them and engage them in ways where they didn't, their life didn't suffer because of it. But I know I personally would suffer because of the things that I was no longer able to do with them. I would probably have to put a lot more emphasis into going out of my way to do things that are less convenient for me to do to provide the same level of enrichment for my dogs. Okay, here we go. We got was this Instagram one? Is biting a type of behavior that is nearly impossible to break with a dog? Is this just their instinct and built in them? I don't want to live in fear that my dog will bite me or worse, someone else. I need a lot more context on that. So you have multiple types of biting, obviously. You have dogs that are just playfully biting, or I guess you could refer to it as like demand biting. So similar to how you have like demand barking. Some dogs will come and like chomp at you to get your attention over stuff, but they're not doing it to try to like maliciously harm you, right? They're not doing it to try to cause injuries or anything like that, but it's still an inappropriate behavior. And I think in those contexts, those are very simple to eradicate. One, obviously, there's not a whole lot of emotional charge behind it. It's not like they're doing it because they're deathly terrified of something and feel like that's the only way for them to protect themselves, if you will. So anytime you're dealing with behavioral issues that are not emotionally charged, it's easier to stop those things because you could easily channel that energy onto something else once you've corrected it, right? Possession aggressive. So I'm assuming you're talking about resource guarding, which we'll kind of get into that in a second here. So if it's biting similar to that, obviously that absolutely can be stopped. When you're dealing with truly aggressive dogs, and when I say truly aggressive dogs, I either mean like dominance related aggressive dogs. So dogs that are truly doing it out of this like instinct of, catching and killing stuff, right? Or controlling scenarios that they're uncomfortable in, or, they are just asserting themselves over somebody else because they don't like, obviously, that person is telling them what to do or what not to do, et cetera, et cetera. Those situations get much more challenging. Do I think it's possible to live the rest of your life with a dog like that and have the dog never bite again? Absolutely. But there is no denying that you have to look a little deeper into why the dog is doing the thing that you're doing. So for example, possession aggressive, right? You have dogs that are resource guarding stuff. Can we stop that? 100%. Can we gain more control around the resources? 100%. Can we make sure that the dog over time starts getting more comfortable with us being in the presence of them while they have these resources? 100%. But as you're working towards that goal, I believe that there's a degree of management that has to go into play of you knowing kind of where the dog's threshold lies and not staying under that threshold all the time, but not making sure we go dramatically over that threshold constantly either. So for example, if you're working through resource guarding with food, right? Initially, yes, you have to ignore the dog while the dog is eating, right? You should not be messing with the dog. You should not just do anything you want to do with the dog while the dog is eating and just expect them to be able to tolerate it. And that in conjunction with correcting for the aggression that you're seeing and gaining control around the resource will start to get the dog more comfortable with you in the presence of them. They don't see you as a threat as much, and they realize they can't just proactively be rehearsing aggressive behaviors towards you to make you go away, right? Over time, you could incrementally add more challenging things into it. Like, for example, what happens if you accidentally brush against the dog while they're eating? Or what happens if you do need to take the food bowl suddenly from them? Like, yes, you could add those things in and make sure that you should be able to do that if need be, and the dog shouldn't bite you. But at the same time, if you start then getting crazy with doing it constantly to the dog, you get back into this butting heads of reassuring them that you actually are a threat in the moment. You're reassuring them at that point that the thing that they thought was going to happen actually is going to happen. And though a consequence may come for biting, you're going to keep the dog constantly on the edge of wanting to rehearse the behavior, which inevitably, unless you are absolutely perfect with your timing with corrections and you're absolutely as motivating as possible with those corrections when you provide them, you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot eventually with it. I mean, it's just you're fighting an uphill battle essentially of pushing against something the dog desperately wants to do and desperately wants to do for this deep emotional reason of like self-preservation. And the correction will inhibit the behavior, but inhibitions can always be pushed back against. So I don't know if that clearly answers your question. It really depends on the context of the dog, right? Yes, you could get past those things, but it could be really challenging to long-term get past those things without a degree of management in place as well. So, okay, we're getting tons of comments. This is cool. Josh, you keep track of the Instagram ones. I'll keep track of the YouTube. All right, let's get into this.
Yeah. Can I say, Dude Lovejoy said, my dog had that Miracle Canine, made all that go away.
Very happy to. Yeah. Dude Lovejoy, who is your dog? I'm curious who your dog is.
Yeah.
Okay. Same topic. Is it mandatory for a dog to have friends or at least to play with other dogs? Balance training gets pretty lonely in force-free countries, and I'm over fighting about it. This is a good question as well. I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday of the context of socialization. We have this dog in for a board and train right now. The dog's in from New Hampshire, and the dog is here for obviously, Marlo. Lovejoy. Yes. Okay. Yes. I obviously remember the last name now. Yeah, Marlo the French Bulldog. How's Marlo? We're happy to see you on here. I haven't heard of Marlo. God, Marlo, when was that? That had to have been 2 to 2.5 years ago. I think that Marlo did training. Very cool. Anyways, dog's in from New Hampshire. Dog obviously has dog aggression issues and then obviously general obedience issues. So not the most reliable with things. Obviously not, not as good when out and about in public with obedience training and things like that. So we've solved all those issues. The dog's fully off-leash trained now. The dog is very reliable with the off-leash training. And we can socialize the dog fine. We have a good plan for how to do so. Generally, it starts with us starting with the dog on muzzle, letting the dog interact with the new dog they're interacting with, obviously, addressing any issue there may be, making sure there's no resources and stuff out. And then once the dog has kind of gotten past that initial, the initial this and that, we could take the muzzle off and the dog can socialize fine. What's crazy? This is the reason why I don't do lives. I'm going to say it right now. I keep seeing all of the comments and stuff come through and just catching my eye of just seeing it like bling, 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 bling.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm like losing my train of thought every time I see it. This is awesome. I love the engagement for first live session, obviously.
That's why I'm like, move the Instagram up so it doesn't go and I'll keep track of it.
That's actually a very good idea.
There you go.
Okay. So I did a phone call update with this client the other day. And she basically asked me that question of like, how do I continue to socialize my dog long term after this? Jesus fucking Christ. Hang on. Can I turn on Do Not Disturb with this? I think I can. I don't ever use it. Which one is it?
I don't know.
Maybe airplane. No, airplane mode.
No, that would be bad.
I'm just going to survive without it. Ask me the same question of how do I long-term socialize my dog? I'm just going to close my eyes. How do I long-term socialize my dog? Because I want to make sure that they have dog friends, but I don't want to be constantly, nervous that there's going to be a problem and this and that. So I tell everybody, first and foremost, where do you need to socialize your dog? In many cases, when people tell me that, they don't have very many situations their dogs need to go out and about and interact with other dogs. It's not like they have family members that have dogs that watch their dog constantly when they're out of town. It's not like they have an office they take the dog to where there's like 2 other coworkers that have a dog that's like wandering around constantly. It's not like they have a friend that comes and stays at their house regularly that brings their dog or anything like that. It's just they feel like because society has said dogs should have dog friends all the time, that they need to go out and socialize their dog. And what's the number one thing people tell people when they get puppies? They say, go socialize your dog. Go take the dog out in public and get the dog meeting dogs and people, or else you're going to have an aggressive monster of a dog. I don't believe that. I think less is more when you have socialization, and I think you have 2 stages when it comes to socializing your dog. You have the initial overcoming social issues. So let's say your dog is nervous of people or dogs, or your dog is aggressive towards people or dogs. We obviously want to solve that problem. And we want to make sure that we have a way to socialize our dog if need be, obviously. But past that, once you've solved that and you've taught the dog good social skills, and when you put the dog into a social, you have a way to make sure it goes successfully, we move into like maintenance stages of socialization, which is, again, less is more. Instead of constantly going out of your way to find friends and find, places and daycares and dog parks and stuff like that to take your dog out and get them meeting other dogs, just do it where you need to do it, right? Like maybe once a month, find 1 or 2 friends that long-term you can get your dog around once or twice a month, right? And make sure it goes well and your dog has a good social outlet. And then make sure all other aspects, the dog is not being reactive towards other dogs. That's the other thing too, is a lot of people look at reactivity and they say, if my dog is being reactive, it's a socialization issue. And the only way I'll get past it is by socializing my dog with other dogs, which is absolutely not true. Those are 2 independent things. And though making sure your dog is overcoming social issues can help in some cases of resource guarding, it's not a long-term solution, right? It's not something where it's like the reactivity starts popping back up, so I got to do more socialization with my dog. It's like you solve this issue, you make sure you have a way to socialize the dog. Outside of that, when your dog is out and about on walks or in the house and stuff, you make sure your dog isn't freaking out at other dogs. And then you socialize your dog where you need to, whatever that may look like. Like with my dogs, the only times my dogs ever socialize with other dogs at this point is if I go on vacation and I leave them at the shop for a prolonged period. They interact with some dogs then. But past that, they're never really around other dogs, and they're not aggressive. I can introduce them all to other dogs and they're fine with it and there's no problems, but it's like, I don't need to do it. And if I tried to force myself to do it more, and I tried to force myself to make more dog friends constantly or put them in more social situations constantly, the more I do it, the more I put myself at risk of running into a problem with it. So I wouldn't overthink it. I would ask yourself the question of where do you need to do it? And in those places you need to do it, are they situations where your dog just needs to be able to coexist around other dogs, or does the dog truly need to interact with other dogs? And then create your training approach based on that. So that's kind of how I look at that.
All right.
You want to give me a YouTube or
yeah, I'll give you some
Instagram
good comments. Sarah says cannoli, resource guards, and would bite me and humans. Miracle.
Say that. Oh yeah.
Cannoli. Yeah, Miracle K9 helped so much, and we are both so happy and confident now around all humans.
Cannoli, we love cannoli. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the kind words. That was a long time ago as well. That was a situation, and Sarah knows this, obviously. That was a teamwork makes the dream work situation. Because I'll tell you, cannoli, little motherfucker, this big, tiny little guy, real reactive, gave us a real run for our money because he started getting so good where, he would push his mom around, and then I would go do a lesson with them, and he would be a little angel, and then he'd push his mom around. So we needed to do the approach of starting to generalize cannoli's training amongst multiple people. So I did a session, right? And then we would have Michelle go do a session, and then we would have Bridget go do a session. So instead of cannoli only associating when David the dog trainer is around, I listen. We started developing an association of when anybody is around, I listen. And that was a cool. That's a benefit of having a facility, and that's a benefit of having a lot of trainers or competent individuals at your disposal to be able to generalize things to. Because sometimes it gets hard, man. Sometimes it gets hard when you're the sole person to be able to get the dog to see everybody as equals when you're the only one that's able to enforce things. So, super cool.
Yeah, and then the lady that asked the question, she said, thanks so much for the feedback, everyone, giving me a lot of faith. My dog, Scout, is currently in their board and train, and until I took him, I was feeling really hopeless.
Okay. So Scout is currently with us. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah. So obviously we talked about Scout. He has possession aggression issues, but a lot of his is centered around being really, really nervous. And on top of being really, really nervous, he is not given adequate direction in the house, right? So a lot of the situations have been Scout has been free to make all of his own decisions. And because he's nervous and isn't given that direction, when he is put in a situation where he gets really triggered by something or really scared of something, because nobody's giving that direction, he feels the need to go and bite. But the other thing we look at too, especially when we know the dog, like we know Scout. Scout's been with us for, I think, a week or so now. Obviously, Bridget's working with him, so I don't know exactly when he got dropped off, but I think it's been roughly a week. Scout is not a dog that wants to hurt people. Scout is a dog that has not given us any hard time with like actual aggression or anything. He shows us that he's nervous in certain situations, but because we're giving him direction and helping him open up in a controlled way, he's not resorting to those types of things. Where a lot of times if we have a dog that really is a problem, where we're really nervous that like, oh man, like this dog is going to have some limitations once they go home with things, or this dog's only going to get so far with these types of things, are the ones that come in and they're so programmed to act aggressively when they get nervous. It doesn't matter that the environment changed. It doesn't matter that there's somebody that's giving direction or anything. They are just so of the mindset of defaulting into that state of mind. So no, Scout will be just fine.
Good. Yeah, let's go to YouTube. Back
to YouTube. Timbo said it gives the dog freedom, referring to the e-collar. The e-collar absolutely gives dogs freedom. Adam Flack Dog Training. Adam, you were one of the people I referred to regarding the consults that I was so thankful, obviously, when you signed up for one and found out that you were all the way overseas. That was super, super cool. Adam says, what are your thoughts on marking and correcting e-collar for loading or changes of state of mind outside of being in command, off lead and free to do anything other, charge at another dog? Okay. I know we've talked about this before. I know Joyful has asked me questions about this before. Many people have asked questions about this before. Let me prepare myself here. Okay. Obviously, we don't correct for loading, right? We correct for clear decisions that dogs make, right? My goal is not to proactively stop my dog from doing things. My goal is, regardless of the state of mind that my dog is in, to make sure that they know how to make proper decisions, right? It's like with humans, right? I know that if I'm a little bit anxious or a little stressed out or a little angry, that will never be an excuse for me to rehearse an improper behavior. And the problem isn't that I get angry about things. Nothing you're going to do is going to stop me from getting angry about things or stop me from getting anxious about things. There's proactive steps that I could put in place to decrease the probability of that happening. But the problem is not that I had bad thoughts or was in the bad emotional state. The problem was what I did with that emotional state. Now, when the dog is in command, your focus should solely be on the command that you're asking of the dog. So that means if it's in a down, I don't care if the dog is loading, I don't care if the dog is whining, I don't care what the dog is doing. I simply care that the dog is in command. And any of those things you're seeing, the loading, the whining, things like that, all that is the dog telling you this is really hard for me to do right now. And if it gets too extreme, the dog will make a mistake, a clear mistake you could correct for, and then they could learn how to avoid it moving forward, right? When the dog is not in command, same context, right? You have to look at what is the dog doing that's a problem behavior. So let's say I'm in the backyard with my dogs, because I run into this a lot because my neighbor's driveway runs along the side of my back fence. I'll be in the backyard sometimes, and I'll see that like the neighbor is going to take the trash out. And sometimes the dogs will kind of stop because they get caught off guard by it, and they'll like kind of stiffen up for a minute and be like, what the heck is over there? And then they see it, and then they're like, all right, it's no big deal, right? And then they wander away, or maybe they'll casually walk up to the fence or something like that. Yeah. But at no point did they make an improper mistake of reacting on that person. But sure, their instinct in that moment might have told them, maybe you should do this, right? Maybe reacting at this threat might be a good idea, but they hadn't made that decision, right? Mm-hmm. So I just think you run such a fine line when you get into correcting for loading with things, where it's like, you know, we can't communicate arousal. It's not like you could tell a dog that when they're at a level 5 arousal, that the second they go to a level 6 arousal is the turning point where they get corrected. That is subconscious. There's absolutely no chance that the dog can make that correlation and truly learn how to avoid that correction moving forward. So when you're correcting for loading, though it works for some trainers, and when I say it works, I mean it suppresses the dog's arousal enough where they just don't make those mistakes in the first place. You're constantly going to be managing the dog's arousal levels because they never connected the dots of really what it was that we didn't want them to do. So you're just stuck then correcting for loading over and over and over again and proactively preventing the dog from getting aroused, but never hitting that sweet spot where the dog just learns what we don't want them to do. So that's kind of like my overall opinion on loading and this and that. And like I said, I'm all for anybody training how they want to train. I'm all for, if it works for you, do it, right? If you're happy with the results that you're getting, do it. But 99.9% of the clients I work with who have been through a training program, who have been in the position where they've been correcting loading or fixating or things like that, they are not happy with their results. They think that the dog is maybe a little bit better than they were before, but they are not truly happy with where they're at with their training, which is why they're seeking out further help then at that point, right? And I think the other side of things too is a lot of people will preach like if you don't correct the loading, the dog will freak out and explode, and then it's like so far gone that you can't correct it away and this and that, which there's a line with this, right? That's why we do a lot of like stationary command work and obedience related stuff in the presence of triggers, because you do want to correct it earlier rather than later, but you still need to have something very concrete and clear the dog can digest that correction for, which in the case of this, the loading isn't the problem, but the second they start popping out of that down might be the problem, or the second they pop out of that sit might be the problem, where if you correct it there, that's the earliest sign that the dog can actually digest that correction and know what to do with it. But it's not so far gone where you need such an absurd amount of aversion in order to get the dog to then stop doing the behavioral issue that it's doing. Let me do one more on YouTube here.
Sure.
All right, Joyful. We're going to get to one of yours. You got a lot, obviously, per usual, which is fine, but I don't know how many I'm going to be able to get. You said, I would hire Denise Fenzi and apprentice with her if e-collars disappeared. Just to be the best possible and still give as much freedom and enrichment as possible. And the dogs, she's talented, R+. Cool.
I'm just going to say over here on Instagram there, everyone is helping Caitlin, the one that asked the question.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, Courtney said...
Just read off some stuff.
Yeah, Miracle K9 changed our lives, even though he wasn't such a fan of David, which their dog is Reese.
Reese. Yeah. So that was Bridget's client. I did a couple of sessions with Reese, and Reese didn't like me very much.
Yeah, and she said David reassured me that he could handle him, and sure enough, they did. I had so much fear for no reason. And our friend at The Art of Dog said, "Man, I'm here for all the other trainers to tell me how I'm wrong, and all I'm getting is people praising you as if you're doing nothing. You're not doing it wrong."
Guys, Dave, The Art of Dog was just on the podcast last week. We had a great 2-hour-long discussion. Coming soon, the 4-hour discussion that we're going to have. I've known Dave for a really long time. He's out in the Buffalo area. I used to go out and mentor under some trainers out that way. And I met Dave through that, and we've just stayed connected this whole time. And he is currently, to this day, the longest-standing guest on our podcast. We've done now what? We determined 3 or 4. 4. We've determined 4 individual long-form pieces of content are out there of us together.
Yep.
Good guy.
And then,
what else you got?
And then we have Paige said, "Cool live."
Yeah.
And then he also just said, "I'm ready for the 4 hours."
Good. I love it. All right, let's move on here. Timbo said, in the UK, we need to train owners to use e-collars before they buy one. So I don't know if this is UK or not. I think it might have been Switzerland. I heard Ivan talk about, they have basically like a certification you need to go through before you could use one and before then an owner can buy one and this and that. And I'll tell you, we've talked about this before. I could understand a little bit this idea of not making them accessible to the general public and just making it so you have to go through a trainer in order to use it and this and that. But we still run into the boat of, because dog training is unregulated and e-collar use obviously is unregulated, everybody uses them kind of different. I mean, you heard me just kind of debating on why I think using them in a particular way is wrong, obviously, or not going to be as effective as another way. It's who do you put in charge of being the person that says you have to go through this program to learn how to use it properly, right? It's
right.
Where do you draw the line of this is the way to do it? Because there's no consensus. Virtually no dog trainers fully agree on how to implement some of these tools.
Yeah.
So that puts you in a really rough position as well. And then past that, I work with so many virtual clients. I shared a story on a couple podcast episodes of 2 virtual clients I've been working with over the last 2 weeks that live in, one's down in Florida, one's in Vermont. Or Virginia, I believe. And literally, these clients have not worked with professional trainers outside of me, and they were able to get e-collars and implement them and drastically improve their relationship with their life in 2 weeks, spending with the e-collar and everything $400 on advice. You know what I mean? So it's why
That's
would
awesome.
I want to also take that away from people?
Yeah.
Using it. I don't know. I'll share my story of the very first time I ever used an e-collar. So when I got my first dog, I was not a professional dog trainer, obviously. And I was going through a training course with a friend, right? Very basic, plastic pinch collar, star mark collar training, right? And this trainer was starting to use an e-collar with his dog, right? And I remember going over their house one time and his dog had it on, he's using it. And I was like, oh, that seems like a cool idea, right? Of something you could communicate with your dog with. And I remember a couple days later, I went to the pet store and I went to go buy an e-collar, right? I went there, they had the Pet Safe products, obviously. I think it was at Pet Supplies Plus. And I was like, yeah, I want to buy this e-collar. It's $120 or something like that. And I remember the employee was like, "You're sure you want to buy that?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "No, you're sure? You know that is negative reinforcement, right?" Which, first off, now it's so funny looking back on it.
Yeah.
Because now that I didn't know shit at the time. I was like, "Oh, negative reinforcement." I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think I want it, whatever.
Yeah.
But looking back on it now, it's people get negative reinforcement, positive punishment. They get them very confused all the time. And it's well, actually, this e-collar can be something else as well. It's not just negative reinforcement, and actually using it as negative reinforcement is more of a good thing. So whatever. But anyways, this guy gave me the freaking spiel for 3 minutes there before he finally unlocked the case and got it out and gave it to me and bought it. And at this point, newbie me, who just got my first dog and bought this e-collar, I went home and I remember putting it on Vera And I remember I went for a walk and I gave a correction and she just like let out this little jump. Like it wasn't anything big. It was like a little jump. And I remember because this guy freaked me out so much, I went right home, put it back in the box, took it back to Pet Supplies Plus, returned the thing, and did not touch an e-collar again until I was a professional dog trainer.
Oh my gosh.
And I say this because you could look at that story one of two ways. You could look at that story way number one, which is, wow, David, that just fucking reassures that, you know, you used the e-collar improperly with your dog and you corrected her improperly and it was abusive and this and that, which it wasn't, right? It wasn't a big deal. She was fine after 2 seconds after getting that correction. But you could look at it from the other lens, which is people don't want to hurt their dogs, right? And all this talk of e-collars are hurting your dog. If an owner who especially isn't getting professional guidance, any reasonable owner is going to take that tool that they bought, try to use it, and if they get even an inclination that they're hurting their dog, they're going to stop doing it right away.
Yeah.
And if they don't, that just further goes to show that whether they have the e-collar or not, they're probably going to do something else that's just as potentially harmful on the dog than using the e-collar would have been.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. You got anything else on there?
Yeah, Plaything Co. just said, I have 2 female chows, and my younger one has high prey drive and will attack my older dog if she sees a squirrel or any other living creature.
Redirected aggression. That's what we call that. I don't want to say easy fix, obviously, but like usually when people are telling me that, dogs are redirecting on other dogs, which basically means the dog is so overstimulated trying to get to something, they can't get to it, and they're so frustrated and overstimulated, they have to take that energy and throw it on whatever's closest to them, whether it's a dog, whether it's a person, whether it's whatever the heck it is. On a fence, you'll see dogs do it to the fence, right? That is redirected aggression. Now, that is not an issue with your dog is going after the other dog, so we need to stop the dog from going after the other dog. That is an issue with this dog has so little self-control and so little impulse control that why is it getting that overstimulated over these triggers in the first place? So I would look at something like that, and obviously I'm sure there's a lot of areas in your day-to-day where you see this problem, maybe not necessarily going after the other dog, but maybe freaking out the window at the mailman, having zero impulse control when people come into the house, being ridiculously impulsive about its food bowl and having no control around it, obviously freaking out at the fence line towards squirrels and stuff. And I would start individually, independently with that dog, chipping away at one of those things at a time. Right? So you need to stop this dog from freaking out at squirrels so bad. And what's the easiest way to do that? With an e-collar, as I just described. This is something that like you hypothetically can buy an e-collar and stop that really rapidly with the right guidance. And then obviously you would move on to the next one. You move on to the next one. I had a family I worked with recently who has like 5 dogs, right? And they were running into a similar situation where 2 of the dogs were getting in fights with each other, but it was always centered around when something else, like it wasn't like, I got a problem with this dog, so I'm going to go after this dog. It was centered around the dogs were too reactive and too impulsive towards outside stimuli, and that frustration was just building and building and building until these dogs would start getting into it with each other. So what did we do? We never addressed the fighting. We went in and we got this dog to stop being reactive on a walk. We got this dog to stop being reactive in the backyard. We got the dog to be have good impulse control when people came over the house and rehearse a good downstay and stuff. And we plugged away that way, and we were able to get through the whole program, and the owner hasn't had any fights since, and like all is good because we addressed the independent problems with the dog, right? Dogs fighting with each other is generally over competition of resources, so food, toys, or affection, or one dog, quote unquote, disciplining the other dog for stuff that you should be disciplining them for. So we'll see either redirected aggression in the form of what you just described, or we'll see the opposite, which is one dog is reacting at a fence line, and because of that burst of energy, another dog will dart over and go after that dog because that stimulation is such a magnet. What do we got here?
Right here's what she said more.
She also does it if she gets hurt at all. Yeah. Okay. So same. Now you'll have to clarify to me, is the one that's getting hurt the one that is getting gone after, if you will?
It's the younger still going after the older.
Okay. Yeah. So same deal. That's the one I kind of just described, which is lack of impulse control and then like this neurotic energy, right? being this magnet for other dogs. So we'll see that if a dog is like injured and it's like yelping and freaking out and like thrashing around and stuff, another dog will run over and try to control that energy, which is an impulse control issue. And it's centered around the dog rehearsing it in all these other places of high stimulation, right? Like the going after other squirrels and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, let me get to a couple of joys here.
Okay. Please train your dog and let's be people both said, what's up, losers?
Yeah, yo. Michelle, I gave you guys credit for being the first ones to do live in front of me. So I am only, let it be known, let the record show I'm only doing this live because I have to do it now that they started doing it. Let it be known. Okay. What is the best approach for a dog that was rescued, neglected by living in a crate for first 13 months of life right now, 18 months and dangerously destructive in the house, 80 pounds and cannot go in the crate, of course. Owner allowed the fight, and it's beyond insane. Slip prong, no go. Only 5 days on e-collar, but if not, did negative. Worried of creating more stress around the crate. In the meantime, he destroyed a bookshelf even 2 days ago. Crate must happen once in the crate, and nonsense can be corrected. How best to initially get him inside without forcing him in. Pulley system also is a no-go. Shuts down, turns zombie, shakes, will not take food. You're catering to this dog too much, right? Listen, this gets back to, I don't like to know all of this past history sometimes because in the end of the day, I'm sorry that this dog had a traumatic experience in the crate when it was younger. And when we say a traumatic experience, I think in some cases, people severely overplay things like the dog lived in a crate for its first 13 months. Like maybe the dog was in a crate more than it should have been, obviously. But that doesn't mean that crates are bad. That doesn't mean that you should never use a crate ever again with the dog. That just means we need to start to shift this dog's association with the crate. And how do we do that? Well, we're not starting with the dog in a neutral position here who has no positive or negative experience with the crate. We're starting with a dog that has a negative experience in the crate, right? So there's no way you're going to get from here to positive association or here to neutral association without going through some shit first. So how do we do this? A couple things, right? Thing number one, you got to have a crate that the dog can't hurt itself in. Get an impact crate. They're expensive. The dog cannot hurt themselves in it though. So you know at least when the dog's in it, even if the dog is really stressed out, they're going to be safe. Thing number two, you got to make sure the dog is going to be able to get into the crate on command. Forget all, you're too worried about all these individual methods of forcing them in, pulley system, no, this and that. How do you train a behavior, right? You've got to be able to physically make it happen. And then you either positively reinforce when the dog does it or use negative reinforcement and remove that pressure when the dog ultimately does the thing that you want them to do, obviously. So following those principles, it's not that pulley system. And when people say pulley system, the pulley system basically is you feed the leash through the crate out the back, and then you use it to feed the dog into the crate, to pull the dog into the crate, obviously. And for some dogs that are really strong and maybe run the risk of redirecting and biting at you when you're trying to get them into the crate, that is the safest and easiest way to be able to do it where you're not in a vulnerable position. So, I don't ever say pulley system doesn't work. I don't know if you said that exactly. The pulley system does work. The question is, how persistent are you going to be in order to get the dog to go in with it? And how much pressure do you need to motivate the dog to start alleviating that pressure and moving into the crate then at that point, right? So it does work. You got to be able to get the dog in. It's non-optional. I don't care how you do it. You've got to be able to get the dog into the crate, and you've got to have a way to either positively reinforce them when they get into it or use negative reinforcement to get them into it. And we work with dogs all the time that have crate anxiety issues. Dogs have to be in crates when they come to our facility. And I've never in my life been in a position where it's like, I can't get this dog into a crate. It's just not, it's just that. It's just not how it works, right? Then once they're in it, this is the other mistake. Don't get willy-nilly with correcting them for stuff.
Willy-nilly.
Right? Seriously, this is a big mistake people make with crate anxiety is because a lot of trainers out there will preach, correct the anxiety, and then the dog will get in the crate and the dog will be anxious and they're like correcting whining, barking, jumping, biting, pawing at the crate. Like they're correcting every potential sign of anxiety, or they jump right into trying to do like a down in the crate or something like that. Pick one single thing the dog does when they're in the crate and create an inhibition for that. Something as black and white as possible the dog absolutely will be able to associate the correction with. In many cases, it's going to be pawing at the crate as the very first one. Stop that and then just deal with the rest for now. Then once that's totally gone, move on to another thing and then deal with the rest for now. Simultaneously, what you can do is you could start addressing the things the dog does when it's out of the crate, when you're prepared to do it. So get a phone, set your phone on FaceTime, leave it pointed into the room, go outside, have an e-collar on the dog, and make sure if the dog jumps up on the window or on the counter or starts chewing something they're not supposed to or whatever it may be, you start correcting some of those things and stopping them so the dog learns when they are free, they can't just rehearse all of these types of things. But it sounds like you're just severely overthinking this situation. You just got to be able to get the dog in a crate, and then you've got to start chipping away at some of these things one at a time. Again, don't get willy-nilly with it. Don't start addressing everything. Even when the dog is out of the crate, pick one thing initially. We do this a lot. I have a dog in for a board and train right now that can be a little anxious, and I've been doing a lot of stuff in the break room with him, and he has a bad habit of when I leave the break room, his first instinct is to try to figure out where we went, and there's windows in it, and he'll jump up on the window to try to see. So I simulate, I put him in there, and then I leave for 5 minutes, and when he jumps up on the window, I correct him for it, and now he's gotten to a point where he no longer gets all worked up when I get up to go leave the break room, right? So you just got to be able to do it, but there's not any magical solution for it. It really comes down to just making sure that the dog can get into the crate. And then when the dog is in the crate, you start chipping away at some of the major behavioral issues. So
I think we got a good, quick, easy one for you here.
Let's see it.
Serena asked, do you have any tips to training your dog to not steal toys, food, treats from other dogs? Or is it keeping dogs separate during feedings or not introducing toys while socializing? Is that the best?
Good question. So, one, I don't incorporate resources unless it's dogs that live in the same house with each other. So if you're talking about your dog does this to like your friend's dog when you do a play date, right, or at the dog park or whatever it may be, take away the resources. Your sole goal when socializing your dog with other dogs that don't live in the house is for them to develop a relationship with each other, and toys and treats and petting just gets in the way of that. So food, toys, affection should be an absolute no-go anytime you're socializing your dog with another dog that is not one that lives in the same house. Now, dogs that live in the same house with each other, what you want to do is you want to be proactive about it, right? So you could tell when your dog has made the decision to go steal a toy. So let's say they're laying 15 feet apart from each other, right? And both dogs have a toy, or one dog has a toy, and the other one just looks at the dog first. And you can tell they're thinking about it. That would be the equivalent of loading, right? That would be the equivalent of thinking through the process. Thinking through the process of stealing the toy. We would not correct for that. They haven't made the decision. But the second they get up and start going to the dog to take it, you would correct them right there and then for it, right? And don't wait until the dog gets all the way up to the other dog, because every time the dog gets all the way up to the other dog to steal that toy, then you put the other dog in a vulnerable position where they feel like they need to be the ones that set the boundary because they're not seeing you do it. So the more proactive you could be about catching it at the first sign of them going to start stealing the toy, they will ultimately stop doing it. Don't give warnings, right? Just give a correction for it.
Nice. Paige said, credit where credit is due. Reminder that it was my idea, everybody.
Wow, Paige. Great work. We're so proud of you. What do we got here? DF. Is it necessary to have a strict program when it comes to e-collar training? A lot of trainers say to use the e-collar in training as a recall reinforcer way before it is used as a punisher. This is just nonsense. I mean, I don't know like how to say it nicer than that, but it's just nonsense. Like using the same example, right? We got this dog Rocky in right now, and Rocky just he's whatever, a young wild dog, right? And he just had this horrible habit of just jumping so impulsively and so crazy and getting mouthy and stuff like that. And it was just an inappropriate behavior, and we needed to correct it. So I used an e-collar day one to correct for that behavior. Got past it, no longer does it. Didn't use the e-collar for anything else for the first 3 or 4 days. Did all his prong collar training, intro and stuff. Just yesterday, I started now incorporating the e-collar into my second thing, which is now starting to train an obedience command. Right? So I'm using it as negative reinforcement now at this point to teach him how to get onto a place bed. And there was no stress with it. He did it just great. Right? Look at that. Get the little thumbs up. That's pretty cool. See if I do it again.
Okay.
Whatever. Did just great with it, and there's no fallout from it. So as long as you understand the principles of using negative reinforcement and positive punishment, it literally does not matter in what order you do it in. It literally doesn't matter what thing you start with first. A lot of the people that will say start with recall is because if you're going to teach a dog anything with an e-collar and you don't know how much you're going to use it for stuff, teaching the dog to move towards you when they feel it and teaching the dog to kind of default to that is not so much of a bad thing. So I think a lot of people start with that because it's kind of a clear criteria the dog can understand of moving towards you when they feel the pressure, and it's probably the most beneficial thing that you could teach your dog as far as an obedience command with the e-collar as well. So. But no, it's absolutely not necessary to do it in any particular order. As long as you use the rules of negative reinforcement or positive punishment, it's just a tool to facilitate those things. Adam Flack Dog Training. Thanks. It's the out of command I've been less clear on, but well explained. So obviously he was the one asking about the loading when not in command. So same deal, loading when the dog is not in a command will still lead to the dog making an improper mistake. So I would rather you wait till the dog makes the mistake and be much more clear about correcting that and much more firm about correcting that. And you'll see him get past it completely.
Mm-hmm. We got another one on here.
All right. Let's see.
All right. This is actually a good one for you. Papa Castor 87 says.
Papa Castor?
Yep. He says, I am mostly a pet dog trainer and an owner unknowingly adopted a working line dog and asked for help. What advice could you give to teach a working line Belgian Malinois the off switch?
The off switch. This is a really good question because this is something I experienced personally, right?
Yeah.
So Vinny, my Malinois, I bought him originally because I was doing Mondio Ring with him. I bought him solely as a working dog, as a competition dog, and those were my dreams and aspirations with him. And I did that for probably the first 2 years of his life, and all was well, and I treated him like a working dog. He was in a kennel when he was in the house, and we went out and trained and worked him and exercised him and stuff, but he went in the house, he went in a kennel, right? As the business got busier and as I got more distracted from the sport dog stuff, I realized very quickly it wasn't going to be sustainable for me to do that long term with him. And the only way I was going to be able to keep him was going to be able to turn him into a pet. And I had thoughts. I had somebody offer me a lot of money to buy him at one point. I strongly considered doing it because I had been told my whole life, like, working dogs aren't pets, right? Like they can't survive in pet dog households. It's just not the case, right? So I decided I was going to keep him. I loved this dog, right? I always viewed all my dogs, like the working dog world is weird because people view them really like they like them, right? But they don't develop the same connections with them, I feel like, as a lot of your average owners do. And take that with a grain of salt, right? I know there's obviously working dog people out there that deeply love their dogs, but a lot of them are very okay with, maybe they love their dogs so much that they feel like the best thing for them is to give them to somebody else that's going to be able to provide this like working experience, whatever. That's not the conversation we're having. As I transitioned, I've made a lot of the mistakes that a lot of trainers out there right now are preaching, which is, if you want these dogs to be good in the house, you have to micromanage absolutely every fucking second of their life 24/7, which meant he was either in a downstay or a bed stay or whatever, virtually the entire time he was in the home. And when I would let him out of those bed stays and downstays to go take him outside, I would go out there and I would like play ball with him for 20 minutes and get him crazy jacked up and then bring him back in the house and put him in a bed. And it's like I lived in this on-off switch life with him where either he was as calm as I could get him to be only because he was managed to being in a downstay or in a bed stay, or he was as jacked up as absolutely possible when I would release him, because I felt like because I was managing him so much, I had to provide all this stimulation in these other areas. And it just created this neurotic, like, God, every time I would release him out of a position, it was like, the absolute chaos was ensuing because he was like, what exciting thing are we about to do next? And I really don't remember what the switch was that flicked, but I starting to realize and shift my viewing on the scenario to, I need to teach this dog just to coexist and make better choices. And this is where a lot of my philosophy comes from in training when I work with clients, is I experienced it in one of the most possible ways, or one of the most difficult possible ways, which was taking this working dog and turning him into a well-behaved family pet, right? And I did that through focusing less on control, because the more you control, the more the dog is going to want to then unleash all of that pent-up energy later on. And I focused on teaching just proper decision making. So I would say with this Malinois, if they're going to keep this dog and if they want to fulfill this dog as best as they can, Make sure the dog is very reliable, obviously, with its training. That helps provide a little bit of a mental stimulation, obviously. And do as little control as you possibly can. Is there a limit? There must be a limit on these lives. Do as little control as you possibly can outside of that, obviously. And teach good decision making. Stop the things that you want the dog to stop doing. Make sure the dog is learning to socialize well and you're overcoming behavioral issues. And then, you have to provide an outlet for them still. So make sure that you're mentally stimulating the dog, obviously, when they're free still. So all these situations, this is the thing I don't love with like these kind of question and answer scenarios is all of these things. I need so much more context to give any type of insight that's going to be truly beneficial to you. So it's best to do a virtual consult if you truly have questions on this kind of stuff, where we could get into exactly what the dog is doing, exactly what the owner is doing, really detail where the holes are and stuff. But these are overarching principles I want you guys to be aware of when you're working with dogs. So keep that in mind. Less control, more fulfillment, and more proper decision-making is what you want to teach. All right, Instagram Live is about to cut off here. I think there's probably an hour-long cutoff on it, so I'm going to go off on that. I'll still be on YouTube for a little bit longer, burn through the rest of these questions. It was great talking to you guys. Take care.
Yeah, he said thank you before. So you must you hit it. You hit what he needed.
Okay, let's see what we got here. Where were we at on YouTube here?
Right there.
Adam Flack, P.S. Barney is all good now. Happy to hear. Yeah, only a couple left. Lursa and me. With handler aggression, dominant dog collars are often recommended. Depends on the context of it. Depends on where you're seeing the reactivity or the redirection. So here's the thing. I like dominant dog collars. I think dominant dog collars are a great tool to quickly gain control of a dog, obviously. So sure, yeah. I mean, they could be recommended from that standpoint. But what I like to caveat that with, because I hear comments like this a lot, is you correcting the dog for redirecting with a dominant dog collar is also probably not going to be the solution long-term for things either, right? A dominant dog collar is a management tool and is exclusively a management tool, but it will not solve your problem. You have to figure out, why is this dog redirecting in the first place, right? What situations are causing this dog to redirect in the first place, and how do we solve those things? And then if worst case scenario, you run into situations where the dog redirects on you, obviously you then have a way to manage the dog. So, and I'm not saying that you don't know that. You very well may know that, obviously, but I just like to add those caveats. Joyful, yes, I did answer the question about the crate.
We'll do a full YouTube video, so you'll be able to see it there.
You'll see it. Yeah, if it cut out, you'll hear it on the actual podcast when we post it. A correction is clarity. A correction can provide clarity, for sure. Anytime you're telling somebody or something yes or no for something, it is providing feedback, necessary feedback, obviously, for what it is you're trying to teach them. Joyful, it sounds like this is regards to something else. Sometimes if you wait past the loading and correct the mistake directly, it can cause the dog to redirect and or react 5 times worse. For dogs like this, would you correct the loading or the redirection? No, I don't. I really don't believe that, Joyful. I think that means that your correction was highly ineffective that you provided. Likely there's probably a lot of other areas where you're making mistakes with the dog, not you directly, but the people that may be experiencing this. Gaining some leverage in those situations will make the mistakes the dog makes that much less intense, making it easier to then punish that away. But no, I do not correct loading for the reasons I described. I do not think it's clear. I do not think the dog learns a whole lot from it. I think you could temporarily suppress the behavior down enough by correcting loading where the dog doesn't rehearse it, but I don't think long-term it's an effective solution for things. So I don't do that. Yeah, it's like if you get a brand new dog in for a board and train and you have like a highly reactive dog, right? And it's like, we could argue that, all right, like, let's say this dog knows a down stay. I could go in the hardest possible situation with this dog immediately, day one, put the dog in a down. And yes, to your credit, when the dog makes the mistake and I correct them for it, it's just like, I've gained no leverage anywhere else. I'm not relevant at all to this dog. And the dog is going to fight through that correction. And maybe because it's gotten away with redirecting, up until this point for so long, that the dog might redirect on me or whatever. Whatever it may be, obviously, it might hold some of the things you just said true, but is that a problem with how I corrected the dog in that moment? Is that a problem with I didn't correct the loading? Or is that a problem if I tried to run before I walked, right? I didn't gain any compliance or any relevance in any other context before I put this dog into the hardest possible situation, right? So this is where balanced trainers, I think, make a little bit of a mistake sometimes when they're pushing back against force-free, because force-free trainers talk about keeping the dog under threshold and slowly increasing that threshold. And though I don't think you need to do it as slow as they recommend, when you have these really reactive dogs, you do have to manage thresholds as you're working past this problem if you want to be successful with it. Because yes, there are some circumstances of reactivity where the reactivity is so fucking intense with the dog that the level of correction or the level of aversion you may need in order to work past that specific moment and actually create an inhibition for it is so high that it's like borderline unethical to be able to provide that level of consequence for it. And when you run into that situation, it's like, we could either say the correction doesn't work, or we could say, okay, let's make this a little easier for the dog to succeed and work our way back up to that, which is the way that I prefer to do it. So you're not going to get me to say that correcting loading is a good idea. Not that I think you're necessarily doing that, but I haven't found it to be necessary. And, per all of these things that I'm describing, obviously. What training books do you recommend, Timbo? Timbo, let me grab a couple books real quick and I'll show you them.
We have the stack.
I don't have the whole stack.
Ah.
But I've got some of the stack.
Oh, geez. Here it comes.
This is not all of them. Now, bear with me. Some of these I have not read yet. Caesar's Way. Tried and true. Just read it. It's a good story. Caesar did a lot for the dog training world. If you're one of those trainers out there that's like, fuck Caesar, he's a shitty dog trainer, he's not a real dog trainer, just shut up, right? Caesar did so much for the dog world, and though there's so much you could look at with him that you might disagree with, you can't deny that he brought the concept of owners disciplining their dogs and the concept of owners looking at themselves and how they are causing behavioral issues to the forefront of the conversation. This one recently we read most of, The Dog Listener, Jan Fennell. I enjoyed this. Again, there's some things in it I thought were kind of a little wonky, but there's some good takeaways. I think, getting back to like the Caesar, there's something to being really in tune with your dog and not focusing so much on this like militant like training of things that I think could be very essential. This was gifted to me by a client. I have not watched this because I don't have a VHS player. David Dykman's Command Performance. It's a two-part series, so might be interesting. I don't know. This is an old book I bought online that we read. We did a couple episodes on this. Mm-hmm. Training Pointing Dogs by Paul Lang. I enjoyed this. I thought this was pretty good. This is an old book. I think this is from like the 50s or something like that. Maybe even 50s. The 40s. I am fascinated. No, 74.
Oh, wow. Oops.
I am fascinated with hunting dogs. That's an area I don't know that much about. So reading through this and reading a little bit about how like people used to train some hunting dogs, I thought was very interesting. Sean O'Shea's The Good Dog Way. I think as I've grown as a dog trainer, there's a lot of areas I wish I would see Sean become a little bit more open-minded to. Maybe adapt some of his methods to, obviously. But I can never deny what Sean brought to the dog world with introducing e-collar use as like this popular thing, obviously. And then just the way the man words stuff to the average owner to get them to understand and see some of their mistakes is very, very good. Dave was just on, and I bought this live on the podcast, The Keeler Method of Dog Training. As Dave said, this book obviously details virtually every training technique that is used to this day is derived in some extent from this book. Same deal. It's old. There's stuff we can nitpick on it. There's stuff that's not great in it that I don't recommend doing, but it's still an impactful book. Caesar's Rules. I have like all his books. Most of his are downstairs. This one was cool because he interviewed tons of different trainers right? Not himself, other trainers, including some force-free trainers and stuff like that, and got their take on how to solve different behavioral issues. So you get a wide variety of opinions on things that you can kind of weed through and see what you like and what you don't like, which I think is pretty cool. There's another one, How to Train Hunting Dogs. I haven't read this one yet. I bought this one with the other book. It's on my list. The Art of Raising a Puppy by the Monks of New Skeet. Great book, obviously. Little dated. It's an old book, obviously, but if you're getting a puppy, obviously, it is an essential read, right? It talks a lot about the early stages, like from 8 weeks when you bring the dog home, before you're even worried about all your training and stuff. Here's how to manage your household with this dog and not run into big behavioral issues. For the Love of Dog, Patricia McConnell. This is a book that the force-free community talks about all the time. Patricia McConnell, obviously, is a very impactful figure in the dog world. She commonly wrote The Other End of the Leash, obviously. And I think there's so much that could be learned from force-free trainers. I think that we get really stuck in this boat of pushing back on them so much that it's like hard to view things we like about what they're doing, right? And to what we can learn from, their ability to manage situations very effectively, because there's a lot of things they can't fully get past. So it's like, they have to manage it in order to live successfully with these dogs. And there's a lot we can learn from that. Obviously, when you're using a force-free exclusive approach, your timing with your markers and your use of reward and stuff has to be very precise. So that's a great book. This one I haven't, these last two I've not read yet. I think these were on Ivan's list of books to read, which is why I bought them. Dog is Love, Why and How Your Dog Loves You, was recommended to me when I was having a lot of the debate of like, do dogs love? Can dogs truly love you? And people said that this book was pretty good regarding getting into, I think, some of the more scientific studies of, animal, particularly dog brain capacity for some of those more complex emotions. So I'm interested to read this one. And then the last one, same deal, I believe, by Ivan, or recommended by Ivan, Punished by Rewards. This gets into, we talk a lot about fallout from the use of aversives and fallout from, obviously, e-collar training and prong collar training and all that kind of stuff. But we don't talk enough about how rewards can be so detrimental when used improperly to dogs. And I'm very interested to read this one. One of my big New Year's resolutions I made for myself this year was I need to read more. I used to be such a big reader. I would read fucking 15 books a year, 20 books a year, stuff like that. And last year, it was almost embarrassing. I think I read 4 or 5 books last year. I probably can name all of them. I read Gary Vee's The Thank You Economy. I read The Power of Habit. I read Ghosts of Honolulu, which is a book on the raid on Pearl Harbor. That was fantastic. I read House of Leaves, which is like a cult classic book that everybody was telling me about that I needed to read. Wild book. And maybe one more book. And that's like embarrassing for how much I used to read. So this year, my New Year's resolution was I am going to read a book every single month. So I'm just about finished with my first one. And I'll be burning into my next one. But I want to add a lot of the dog books that I had been planning on reading that I haven't had a chance to onto that list. So as I do that, I'll obviously get into it with everybody else and talk about them, and we'll kind of go from there. So, all right. Well, we're going to wrap this up. That was good.
Like this was successful.
Very successful. Nice long one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We're going to try to do this once a month. So once a month, Plan to See is on here. In the meantime, if you guys have any topics you want to go over, let us know.
See you.